Hello! Unisby here for working on our doorstep, a little tour of life at university in the South Pacific. Welcome! How was your flight? I guess we don't get to ask that question much nowadays, but I'm Joel, and along with my wife Tiff and our two little boys, Hosea and Timmy, we've been working with CMS in Vanuatu, supporting the start of a national movement of gospel-hearted tertiary ministries, the GNYF, the Good News University Fellowship. Today, we're going to try and get a feel for what it's like living and studying in the huge mass of ocean just to our east. How things can look and feel very similar and can end up being quite different. And how you guys can be active in praying for people like you in places very unlike yours. And maybe even take a step or two to getting your hands dirty. The South Pacific is very beautiful. Forget your sandstone squad. In this cold winter, I'm talking about this and this and this. And everything happens a little bit more slowly. And even though the ocean is huge, the population is quite small. Most countries in the South Pacific are playing catch up with their bigger siblings in the Pacific region. Economically, the South Pacific's playing catch up. Financially, most countries, especially Vanuatu, are quite financially poor. The bulk of the population live in small villages, they grow their own food, they live in huts that they've built themselves. And while there's a certain simplicity to a life that's focused on just having enough to make it through the next day or week or season, it's also a very fragile life in a region that's very prone to natural disasters, volcanoes, tsunamis, the yearly cyclones that knock down what we've only just built up. It's playing catch up socially. It's pretty messy having very small scale oral communities in the villages, a short plane flight away from plush and modern resorts, from universities, from cruise ship wharves. And while they're often very proud of their traditional cultures, their family structures, our way of doing things, many islanders are also being thrust into having to fit into life as we do it in Australia and New Zealand, because we are the tourists that fund resorts. We are the expats advising their governments. We're the aid workers dropping the rice after the cyclone. And while it's not very easy anywhere, the South Pacific is an especially hard place for women. Men get first dibs on most of the educational and social opportunities, and sadly, the South Pacific has some of the highest rates of abuse of women in the world. It's playing catch up educationally. There's a bit of variety around the region. Tonga, just a few hours further east of Vanuatu, has one of the highest number of PhDs per capita in the world. There's huge value placed on higher education, while in Vanuatu, about half of kids don't even finish high school. In fact, in Vanuatu, only about 0.9% of the population are in tertiary education, maybe 2,500 people in the entire country. And they're playing catch up spiritually. There are churches everywhere in the South Pacific. Very effective missionary efforts in the 1800s leading to speedy growth. But with that rapid growth came the battle of trying to grow in maturity as well. Trying to engage with older spiritual beliefs that are still very strong even today, but buried very deep, and struggling to equip each new generation to treasure the gospel of Jesus, to live lives that honor him as they face growing up with some of the old challenges of poverty and disasters and trauma, and some of the new of wealth and education and the opportunities that come with them. With that little backdrop in mind, let's take a walk around our university scene. Because of the economic and development issues in the region, most countries weren't really in a position to do much in the way of higher education for a long time. And so 13 countries from all around the South Pacific, Fiji, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Tokelau, Tonga, Samoa, Niue, Tuvalu, Kiribati, FSM, the Marshalls, the Cook Islands, they all got together to form the University of the South Pacific. One uni spread out over 33 million square kilometers of ocean. And if you're one of the few who excel enough at high school, or are related to the right people to get you a scholarship and get to university, you'll be studying with people from over 300 different languages. Now, ostensibly English is the academic language, but you've got to remember that's probably your third or fourth or fifth language, and you probably learnt it from people for whom it's their fourth or fifth language too. And at some point, you'll probably have to move countries to finish your degree because they had to spread the load around the different countries of the USP. Agriculture, marine science, off you go to Samoa. Law, in you come to Vanuatu. Now, day-to-day life is probably pretty similar. Our students sleep during the day and stay awake all night. They delay their assignments as long as humanly possible. They freak out during exams, but you've grown up in a village. You're writing those assignments in your nth language. You're probably struggling to keep your marks up for your government scholarship to hold. And our GNYF groups on campus might look pretty similar too. We actually have two groups at the USP campus in Vila. One is ECF, the Emilus Christian Fellowship, which is in English and mainly works with law students from all around the region. The second is EKF, which also means Emilus Christian Fellowship, but is in Bislama, our local Creole language, and is for our local Ni Vanuatu students and the Solomon Islanders whose language is close enough. And even though we're just a little bit smaller than EU, we've only got about 100 students in the whole country, we pull whatever stunts we can at the start of year, the open day, to connect with new students. We eat lots of food with them. We try to hook them into something to do with the Bible. Now, we do a little bit of one-on-one Bible reading. Last year, we had a big sort of outreach push where we modified Uncover, reading Luke together with people. But the bulk of what we do is in small groups. Except small groups for us are about 30 people, which we then split up into even smaller groups of 3 to 4 with a leader there. And they read a little bit of the Bible together. Then each person in that little group gets to share something. And then each group gets to share with the whole group, while someone like me tries to kind of pull it all together. You might have heard of the Swedish method of reading the Bible, where you sort of have a passage and scribble on it. We've adapted it via the student movement in Fiji to make the Fiji method. And this fits our context pretty well. A big chunk of Bible on the left, focusing on that, while most churches in the South Pacific would probably preach on a topic and kind of throw a handful of verses up in the air and see what lands. And then next to it, it asks some very accessible questions. What's something you like in this passage or that struck you? What questions do you have? What does this passage make you want to change in your life? Who's someone you want to tell something you've learned today? And anyone can answer questions like that. A mature, well-taught Christian, a non-Christian, an atheist, a Hindu, an animist, somebody just trying to work stuff out, whatever. And it honors our communal culture as everyone gets to say something. A leader gets to provide a little bit of guidance, and then every group gets to share, so no one person ever feels the pressure of being right or wrong. And it's dead easy to do. We've even done this with some of the lecturers at the USP. And one of my colleagues in Fiji does it with his family every day. And in fact, one of his kids has been doing it with his friends at school. It's great stuff. And there'll be a link at the end to an example of the method if you'd like to give it a try yourself. But you know, we've had a bit of a hiccup too in the EKF with our local students, which is even this quite simple method is simply too hard. Even though they're at university, they've not really been trained the same way we have to be able to read and comprehend and analyze texts of any kind. And so to be presented with a chunk of Mark's gospel and then have to think about what that means is new to many of the students we've had. And it's exhausting. It actually led to a bit of an exodus from EKF last year, not because people weren't interested, but on top of trying to keep up with their courses, this text-focused discussion about Jesus from the Bible was just too much. And we've tried to learn from some of the research on orality, you know, working with people who are more comfortable with the spoken than the written word. But most of that good research focuses on groups that haven't received the gospel before. And so, you know, we tried one of their kind of tried and true methods like Bible storytelling, and it was it was received as a little bit kind of condescending. Because if you're, unless you're a Hindu or a Muslim from Fiji or an atheist lecturer from America, in the South Pacific, you are 100% sure that you're a Christian. Because it is as closely tied to being a Ni Vanuatu or an Italki Fijian or a Tongan as the language you speak or the fact that you never get sunburned. Right? You've heard bits of the Bible your whole life. You've grown up in a church your whole life. It doesn't mean you've ever understood what you've heard. It doesn't even mean the Bible has been in your language. It doesn't mean anyone's ever told you about Jesus. But you're sure you're saved because of the community you come from. So in Sydney, when I worked at UTS, when you meet someone for the first time, you assume they know nothing about Jesus, right? You start from the absolute beginning with them. You get ready for the usual objections, and then you try and kind of swindle them into bumping into one of the staff workers. Then, bam, they're kind of on the gospel train. But in the islands, you have to come from a bit of a different angle. You have to assume that they assume they're okay with God because they're Ni Vanuatu, Fijian, Tongan, whatever. Even though deep down, most of the students kind of put themselves in the bad Christian category because of whatever stuff they've gotten up to recently. And you got to try and work out what's really going on deeper down. What's really driving them? Is it the old spirit beliefs that are dressed up in Sunday clothes? Is it the lies of the greedy preachers they've seen on YouTube? Is it the twisted doctrines of the cults, the JWs, the Mormons that are quietly conquering the South Pacific under our noses? Is it the well-intentioned efforts of churches who would love to teach the Bible, but don't have access to one in their language and someone to read it with them? It's the same focus, isn't it? Bringing people back to Jesus in the scriptures, but starting from a really different place in the discussion. I'm ready to walk the same long road as we walk, as we try and work through the pain of past trauma, the responsibility of being the educated one with earning potential in your poor family, the need for integrity in leadership as your community, even your country, kind of thrusts you up into a position as soon as you've got your piece of paper. But because we're a much smaller and newer movement than EU, we're always kind of on the edge. Sometimes the only people we've had week to week are our student leaders. And so we pour a lot of our time and our efforts and our hearts into them. And I don't know what EU does for training now, but in Vanuatu, we do a weekly session on a Saturday called SALT, which is a mega 3 to 4, sometimes even 5 hours kind of effort at our house with all of our student leaders together. And we spend some time preparing the passage for the next week's Fiji method, right? To kind of just give them an extra bit of lead time and guidance to steer their group's discussion. But then bulk of what we do is actually tackling a big topic in life or ministry or theology, trying to disciple these guys as best we can. So last year, we spent the whole first half of the year thinking about evangelism. What actually is the gospel? What are the different ways we can proclaim the gospel to another person, to a group, to an entire university? How do you do it when you're the youngest and the least important member of the family? How do you do it when people are coming from such different perspectives? Then second semester, we looked at sexuality and gender. Because in the South Pacific, any talk of sex at all is absolutely taboo. But judging from the number of issues we've had with moral failure and the number of mysterious 9-month absences from classes, somebody's kind of worked out what to do. And given also the rigid gender structures of the village, right, are crashing into the world of Western pop culture and visiting lecturers and NGOs with agendas, we had to start somewhere, even with the biology, and then work to the theology. Same focus again. How do you love and trust and know and follow Jesus? But walking that path with a different forest of issues around you, some different bumps to navigate along the way. That's just a little taste of how things can be the same and different just a few hours' flight away. But there's two places to go now. The first is to pray for the different universities of this world and all their quirky little contexts, big, small, sandstone, bamboo, whatever it might be. And the second is to start to think about what the work that lies out there looks like, what it takes to do it, and how you might take a few steps towards it yourself. Well, the first step to praying for universities around the world is to get a taste of what they're like. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to get onto the IFES prayer line, which is a regular snapshot of gospel work in universities in almost every country of the world from the international network that we're part of, IFES, Vanuatu, Australia, plenty of others. And it's good as you think about this to pray for the context of the university, the country itself. So for Vanuatu, you might want to pray for wise leadership of the country in a region that's given to corruption. Pray for food and for housing where it's lacking, particularly after natural disasters. Pray for repentance and new hearts in the sins that run deep in that place, like the treatment of women. Pray for the church to rediscover its first love and throw itself into the Bible in pursuit of Jesus. It's good to pray too for the students of those universities, the problems they face in their context. Some of them we can empathize with, others not. The stress of poverty, untreated mental health, past trauma, even things like the issues with technology that we assume will be there and be functional. So right now in the South Pacific, you pray for USP, our regional university. A whole lot of corruption in the leadership has just been exposed. And there's this legal issue at the moment where the board tried to sack the current vice chancellor because he was trying to clean up the act. For our movement in Vanuatu, you can pray for the local students who've been forced to online learning due to COVID. But because they come from poorer backgrounds, they don't have internet at home and they can't access the campus to get some, leading to a whole lot of stress for them and their families. And then lastly, pray for the gospel work on those campuses. For the gospel to be at the absolute beating heart of all they do. As students, we tend to want to just be active and doing something and fixing the world's problems. Pray that the gospel would be the heart of that too. For students to be sought out by students, to be saved by Christ, and to be trained and matured by the scriptures to serve God faithfully in their studies, in their future work, and the leadership that often brings. So for ECF and EKF, pray that we would have wisdom in how to best connect people and the Bible when texts are difficult. Pray that we'd have wisdom in how to care for those who are unable to be on campus and struggling to connect with our community. It'd be great if you could take a few minutes now to pray. Pray for perhaps the universities of Vanuatu or perhaps another place that you have contact and knowledge of. And then I want to encourage you to think. There's going to be a link to some case studies to try and put yourself in the place of students elsewhere in the world and think about what it would take to do gospel ministry amongst them. The first case study is thinking about the issue we've had with written Bible texts. We want people to be understanding Jesus from his word, but what do you do when the word is hard to understand? When oral methods are seen as a little bit kind of childish, but inductive Bible studies are just too hardcore. The second case study is thinking about some of the context issues we've had of trying to disciple girls in a male-dominated society. With this strong patriarchal kind of culture, women have lower school attendance, reproductive healthcare issues, greater responsibility for the house and the children, lower literacy levels. And that's changing the closer people live to town and, the girls just do better at school than the guys. And on top of that, the high instances of abuse and harassment of women, the church, parachurch ministries, including our student groups, being overwhelmingly kind of run and powered by our women. How can we help those young women flourish as disciples of Christ while navigating all of the complexities of changing cultural shifts in gender expectations, in their romantic relationships, and spiritual growth? And then thirdly, thinking a bit about how the culture and beliefs of Vanuatu affect our work in the universities. One of the deep themes, if you like, of Vanuatu culture is reciprocity. That relationships and community harmony are really the most important thing. And they're maintained by keeping these mutual obligations, right, of kind of give and take. You know, so if somebody wants to grab some coconuts from my yard, he brings me some bread first. Somebody brings some food to my house, I fill the container with my food and give it back to them before they leave. Right? If I'm raising money for my Bible college I teach at sometimes, I can only charge a little bit more than the food is worth. Now, how can we as a ministry in Vanuatu pursue financial sustainability in a cultural context where just asking for money is quite abrupt and rude? Even more importantly, if reciprocity of give and take is at the very heart of how relationships work, what does that mean for how we understand salvation by grace? Once you've had to think and wrestle with some of those issues of sharing the gospel in other contexts, I want you to think about what the one step is that you can take into the wild world of LR university work around the globe. Do you need to just get some more awareness? Something like the IFES prayer line. Do you need to get praying for USP, for another uni you know outside of Australia? Do you need to get ready? Start dreaming about what campus gospel work could look like in a different place. Could you get a taste of that with international students at USyd? And when the world changes again, could you get a taste somewhere else in dedicated service of Jesus on campus somewhere? Thanks for coming to Vanuatu with me. I'll be praying for you, and please pray for us and the universities around the world.